This week, Michael Tanji joins us for his take on security startups and some about his background, which you're going to want to hear because Michael reached out to us, and I'm very excited to have him on the show today. Then we're going to talk about the 5 biggest mistakes a startup can make, measuring threat hunting, things to abandon as a startup CEO, and don't be a you-know-what and trash bigger companies when you're a startup because they might buy you someday. All that and more on this edition of Startup Security Weekly. This is a Security Weekly production.
From the top.
LogRhythm's Netmon Freemium delivers real-time network visibility to quickly identify emerging threats in your IT environment. Netmon Freemium is a free, commercial-grade network forensics and traffic analytics solution. You can use Netmon Freemium's powerful capabilities to search against all observed network traffic, identify abnormal traffic patterns and application usage, and quickly analyze full packet captures. Take the first step towards real-time network visibility. Visit logRhythm.com/freemium to learn more and download it today. Welcome everyone to Startup Security Weekly. This is Paul Asadorian, and among other things, I can proudly say I have better dance moves than Michael Santarcangelo.
I'm sitting down.
We're broadcasting live from G Unit Studios in Rhode Island, and of course on the lines via Skype is the number 2 dancing maniac, Mr. Michael Santarcangelo. Welcome, Michael, to the show.
That's totally true. I'm going to start taking lessons. I'm coming back with a whole routine and blinged out. You're not even going to be able to handle it.
You have to come here in the studio, and I'll show you some moves, dude. It's cool.
A little dance off?
Yeah, we'll do a little dance off. We've done that before, and I won, so just warning you. I'm the reigning dancing champion here in the studio, apparently.
I won.
Oh, it's good to be here. Last week we took off because it was the day after Thanksgiving, which is kind of like an unofficial official holiday. So it's good to be back in the saddle again.
Agreed.
Go ahead, Michael. Sorry.
No, I was agreeing with you. I enjoy our conversations. I enjoy what we're learning. The feedback we're getting is fantastic. We've got awesome interviews, and the whole. I'm loving how all of this is coming together. So, like when we take time off, I get a little twitchy. So it's nice that we're back.
It's interesting. I am just amazed at the caliber of people that want to be on the show, that contact us to be on the show, or when I reach out to them immediately, they're like, yeah, I'd love to be on the show. So I'm very thankful for that. And today's guest is no exception to that, certainly. Michael Tanji actually reached out to me, and now look, here he is on the show. Michael, why don't you do us a favor and give us a quick introduction about your background and introduce yourself for us.
Sure. I am currently managing director at a company called Wapack Labs, which is a private cyber intelligence company. Prior to that, I spent 7 years as a co-founder at a company called Kyrus, which focuses on offensive security and cybersecurity and R&D. Dual-hatted at that time. I was one of the co-founders of the original company that's now called Carbon Black. And prior to that, I worked for about 20 years in the government.
And Michael, now that I see you like almost in person, like an animated version of you rather than just a picture, I have to imagine that somewhere in your past you were a stunt double for George Takei.
Yes.
Okay, just checking. I say that because I met George Takei once, which is
nice.
Another interesting story for another time.
And he basically said, Paul, when you meet Michael Tanji, your life is going to be complete. The circle
That's right.
is okay. All right, so I get it now.
So, Mike, I want to go back into your past, like after the stunt double for George Takei thing, and talk about was Carbon Black the first startup in security that you were involved in?
I would say Kyrus was probably the first proper startup.
Right.
Carbon Black was a spin-off off of Kyrus. From a perspective of Kyrus is really much more of a services company focused on the government. I think you're right in saying that Carbon Black is probably the first, as most people would understand or frame a startup. That would be Carbon Black. So yeah.
You paid us a great compliment. You said that you were listening to the show, and it was almost like we were a fly on the wall when you were starting Carbon Black. So I want to hear how that all kind of came about and what were some of the challenges and success stories when you were starting Carbon Black.
Sure. So I think probably so Carbon Black was kind of an accident, right? We did a instant response engagement, and we sent a couple. We were still 5 guys in an old dentist office, which had to stand in for the proverbial garage, and we sent 3 people out on this instant response engagement, and 2 of them had done instant response before. The other one spent most of their career breaking into systems, not fixing them. So we did the instant response, and we came back. And we did a little after action and said, what worked, what didn't work? Are we going to do this? And what can we do better? How can we differentiate ourselves? And the guy who did offense for a living, his question was, is that what IR is like? You show up, there's vomit on the floor, there's in the form of disparate logs and things everywhere, and nobody knows where anything is, and it's a big mess, and you got to kludge this all together and figure out what happened. And they said, yeah, pretty much. That's IR in a nutshell. And he said, well, why don't you just monitor execution on a host? That way you can, when something bad happens, you can trace back the process to where it all happened, and then you can nip that in the bud. And the response was, well, if you're so smart, why don't you code that and make that a thing? And the counter response was like, well, surely somebody has thought of this before, right? This can't be a novel idea. And at the time, it was not a novel idea. There were 2 other companies that were doing something similar in the space of if you look for evil as it executes. So evil lands, it has to ask for cycles, right? So if you can watch that and get that there, you don't have to worry about, you're not imaging 1,000 boxes. You're just imaging, 2 or 3 boxes that actually have a problem. And there were a couple reasons why those 2 things didn't work out, and that's a conversation for another day. But Carbon Black was we learned some lessons from those folks and from our own backgrounds in development. And so the rest is history. Acquisition by Bit9, and then total rebranding of the company and retooling of the company for Carbon Black at the start of this year, actually, as a matter of fact. So, and 2 of the guys who helped create Carbon Black are actually still with Carbon Black. I rotated back to the mothership at Kyrus to get a couple other things going. So
early on in the days of Carbon Black, Michael, when you were approaching customers for the first time, did they know that they had this problem, and did they understand that it could be solved in this way?
So the biggest problem I would say that we had was we would show up and we would explain, look, you have to ask for cycles. If we can catch this thing, we can walk back the process tree to the very beginning. Here's where it started. Here's patient 0, and you can work your way back. You can solve this much faster than the traditional methods. And they all kind of got it. But there was always a question of like, well, where does this fit, right? So I have, I'm a CISO or I'm an IT manager, and I have a budget for antivirus. I have a budget for forensics and incident response. I have a budget for firewalls and intrusion detection and all that sort of stuff. Where does this fit into that? And we hadn't really gone through the process of going, this fits into this thing, because you can't show up and go, I have this new thing, and you should allocate budget for that. That guy's got to go upstairs, and he's got to have this make sense, and he can't talk about process trees and those sorts of things to the CEO and go, oh sure, here's $100,000. That's not going to happen, right? Where does this fit in? Where do the product fit? What does it do? And making sure that sort of thing. Because all the technical people got it. They're like, yes, I would like to buy 1 unit of security, please. But getting them, getting the budget, getting them to make those decisions, and allocating funds for that sort of stuff, it was a huge. It's something we learned very quickly. We had to the messaging and making sure that we were telling a compelling story that fit into the existing way that people view the world.
Did that impact product development? Because it kind of sounds like you're in a similar boat to myself and a lot of other startups too, where you sometimes feel like you have this tool and it's for the technical person or the analyst.
Oh.
And you want to expand it so that it fits into an architecture and other people can use it and multiple people in the organization and management can get reports. But in the beginning, I think a lot of us in startups, right, we've got like this tool for the analysts and technical people, and it's awesome, but making that progression is difficult, I think.
Right. So selling some sort of command line thing is it's great if you're only selling to nerds, but nerds don't have budget. So you've got to have buttons and you've got to have dialogues and you have to have all the menus and all these sorts of things. So you have to make it usable. You also, so we learned that lesson very, very quickly that nerds don't cut checks. So we have to have something that's usable. 2, making sure that what you're producing plays well with others, right? Because this is not, it's not a single function app. No one's going to buy this thing and it's going to solve all their problems. It's got to be extensible. It's got to work with SIMs. It's got to work. You need an API. You need all these things because people already own other products and other services, and if you can't interact with those things, you're going to have a big problem. And then making sure that you actually ship something. I work with guys who perfection, right? Perfection is in their blood, and it has to be precise and it has to work a specific way, and all these sorts of things, and that doesn't. Nobody cares. Right. I'm not going to say nobody cares. I'm not going to say nobody cares, but people who are making these decisions to buy, they want to know that it will work with their things and it will answer their questions. They don't necessarily care about this edge case that you're concerned about because you're deep in the kernel. They don't know. They don't understand. They can't spell kernel. They just want it to work. So.
Yeah, and the developers are usually like, well, we just need to rewrite like this entire base of code over here, and then the next revision will be better. And I find working in a startup, you have to reel the reins on the developers. And like one of the rules is like, okay, if you're going to rewrite more than like 10 lines of code, let's talk about it first before you just like, oh yeah, well, I'm working on rewriting like those 500,000 lines of code because I didn't like the way that came out, right? It wasn't perfect.
Nobody cares about your edge case, right? I mean, worry about the edge case when the edge case pops up. You're aiming center mass because you're trying to. If you don't get this in people's hands and they're not paying you, then this whole thing is a waste of time. So.
But no, I want to point something out though, because Michael, you're very enlightened about this. Is this just now you've had time to reflect on it, and so you've got that wisdom, or had you had an experience prior in your career where you started to realize? Okay, I've got to make this make sense to somebody else so that they'll free up the funds. I mean, like everything you said is exactly what we would preach to somebody and what we see in success. Did you already have that? I mean, that had already been forged in you by the time it was you were at that stage, or did you learn fast?
Yeah, so I'm usually one chapter in one book ahead of the technical team, and all those other sort of soft skills and that sort of thing, which has served us well. So there's the book learning, and then there's the reality, right? You have to put it into practice. So I'm not saying, and I'm preaching to the choir here, and I'm not saying anything that's novel. You can read any business, marketing, sales, startup life sort of book, and they will all tell very similar stories. But you know these things, and you look at your own operation, and you go, okay, well, we should adjust this, and we should adjust that. You have to get slapped in the face by life to make those lessons get driven home, because you pay lip service to it, and you think, well, and you really you really hope that the tech is going to win them over, right? They're going to see this technology and they go, yes, this is awesome. It's like, no, they don't. They don't. The nerds care. Your peer nerds over there care, but the guy who's making the decision doesn't care. He wants to hear he wants to hear a superior story to what the last guy told, right? If you can tell a better story than the other guy, you're going to win, right? Because the guy's not making a technical decision. He's getting input from his technical people. He's getting input from other people, but he ultimately has to make a decision that's it's financially oriented, that fits into the larger business strategy. And if you can tell a story that makes him feel comfortable, that's what he's going to go with.
Yeah, no, you're dead on with that. That's awesome.
And I find that interesting, Michael, because I was just speaking with someone this week, and it happened to be on this particular call. The CISO was on the line, and based on what you said and based on what I've read in a lot of those books and heard other people that have done startups say, is that there has to be a really big focus on customer service. And in fact, I mean, that's what a lot of those marketing and sales books are really saying, is you have to care about the people that you're selling to and care about what they care about, right? And have really good customer service. And I think the higher level executives value that so much more than the technology, that you could show them every whiz-bang feature under the hood. But I think what they're really looking for is a comfort level with you. And I think customer focus and customer service are a huge part of that, right? Is that something that you focus early on?
It's absolutely huge. Marketing, sales, and customer service and the customer relationship is something that technologists tend to discount, and not because they're antisocial.
Well, that's part of it sometimes too.
That's part of the formula. But really, it's like, well, I've given you this awesome technology. This should be intuitively obvious why you'd want to do this. No, people like to have their hand held. They like to be made to be to feel important. And the more you do that on all levels, even if you don't end up. Arguably, some of our best advocates in the early days of Carbon Black were people who didn't necessarily buy, right? They didn't buy from us. Okay, that sucks, but we'll go on. They would, we kept in touch with them. We kept them, send them updates. If something was on the roadmap that they wanted, it's like we would keep them apprised of that sort of thing. And again, maybe they bought, that would be great. Maybe they didn't, but they would always refer us to someone. And if they had a pain that we didn't address, we would refer them to other people. Being known as someone who can solve problems in general, as opposed to like, this is my one horse thing and I don't care about anything else. That was a huge benefit to us. It both directly and indirectly over time. So
I love that. That's awesome. That's awesome. That people who are not your customers can still be one of your biggest advocates because of the way that you treat them in the whole process. And I find that when I talk to startups and do my own startup, that especially early on, you have to have a laser, not even kind of, like you have to have a laser focus. And part of your story is why you're not doing some of those other things. And that's something that you just alluded to, Michael, right? And you have to have a good story about why you're not doing those things. Like we don't, in our startup, right? We don't do logs, right? And we have a good story, I think, around why we don't do logs, and we focus on the network. And I like your thing because it's okay for me to say, well, maybe we're not the right fit. You may want to go someone else who more fits with your strategy, because people just think that or maybe it's true, there's lots of ways to solve the problem, and we may not always have the right solution for everyone. So I think that's awesome.
Right. Yeah. Making sure that folks understand that you're not, the guy that's selling threat intel today was selling antivirus yesterday, and he was selling IDS the day before that. There's a reason why CISOs and those sorts of folks screen calls and have this elaborate process for sussing out who's worth talking to and who's not. If you come at this from the perspective of, I'm a problem solver and I'm going to help you solve your problem, whether it's my solution or someone else's, they will talk to you. They will come back to you. They will answer your phone calls, as opposed to the guy who's just going the coin operated. And more power to professional salespeople who are coin operated, that they kill it and they do a great job of it. And I wish I had that kind of skill and that kind of temperament. I think things would have gone a lot differently early on. But just being, even if you don't have that kind of temperament and those skills, just being the guy who solves people's problems is going to get you pretty far along. So.
Do you think that's more important in security than some of the other fields because of the level of trust that people want to have in their security products?
I think the general principle applies universally, because you're trying to sell somebody something to solve a problem, whether it's a security problem or something else. And I think you're right, though. It is particularly important in security, because if you're selling widgets, it's easy to measure the the value, the quality of the widget, the value of the price, and all those sorts of things. Security, it's very hard to get ROI, right? So if I buy this thing as opposed to this other thing, is it going to be more cost effective? Is it going to give me the answers I need? It's going to solve the problems that I need in the most cost effective way. And, now and over time, all the calculations that you would do in any other aspect of your business, you really don't. It's very, very difficult to get that sort of information. So being known as someone who is trusted and is going to direct you down the right path to the right people, I think is super important, because you can't measure. You don't have the metrics. I mean, you can do that. It just takes more time and energy, and most people who need security help don't have that time. So,
or that skill set. It's a different skill set.
Right.
So, Michael, was Kyrus a consulting services company?
So yeah, well, we started off doing a lot of software development for other security products. That kind of kept the lights on while we waited on. So our background, all the co-founders, we were either in the military or the government, or government contractors. We had all worked at another government contractor, and we had kind of made this decision that the magic that we had at the beginning, and now that this company is much bigger, and how they were doing things wasn't really how we wanted to do things. So we had that one contract to keep the lights on while we waited for some government contracts to come down the pipe and get us to where we wanted to be as far as the type of work we wanted to do for the customers that we wanted to do it.
Yeah. So like, what's it like to make that transition from not a product company and not making a product for everyone in the general market to spinning off and creating a product company? And I think that's something that a lot of us struggle with, because a lot of us get into security and we're generalists and consultants. And I think a lot of us want to make that leap into, or some of us anyway, will make that leap into a product company.
Yeah, it's super. It was so lots of lessons learned, and very, very painful ones. And you can read the literature and you can keep up with the current events and that sort of stuff. But like I said, you don't really realize how much more painful it is until you're actually doing it, and how much longer things take, how much more complicated things end up being, how much more things cost. The cost of getting this into people's hands. Being former government people, being former intelligence people, that got us in the door. But once we were in the door, because people are intrigued by that, and they're intrigued that you have something novel to show them. But once you're in the door, you have to perform, right? You have to give them something that actually does a thing, because they're not XSpook. That only gets that's not going to cut it, right? I kind
of feel like, Michael, once you're in the door, you're just like everyone else.
You're absolutely like everyone else, and you have to have something that stands out. It differentiates you from all the other people who are doing something in that same space. So, which is why the marketing, the sales aspect, and that human touch is very important. Being able to tell a really good story, a real compelling story, in a way that resonates with your target audience, right? And your audience is may differ, right? For the message you want to say to a CISO, to an IT manager, to a practitioner, those are three different messages. And you've got to be able to frame things accordingly. So,
oh God, you're bringing back memories when I was a product marketing manager. Wow.
Yeah. So Carbon Black. Right? One of the things that we wanted to we never really fully carried this out, but one of the things that so if you think about process execution and monitoring, if that takes off. So imagine a world where this sort of thing takes off. All of a sudden, what do you need DFIR people for, right?
Right.
I don't need expensive instant response. I don't need, and at the time this was going on, guidance and access data and all the big players were always, it's this enterprise product, right? You push agents out everywhere, and when this happens, we can do our thing, and it's massive products. And we were selling a thing that could address the problem very, very quickly, at a fraction of the cost. And now you don't need to pay all these guys, $300, $400, $500, $600 an hour to come and clean up your digital vomit. But we had this problem. The DFIR people that we talked to, we put this in their hands and they would use it. It's like, this is fantastic. This makes my job so much easier. So we came to this crossroads internally. We're like, well, we could do this campaign where we basically push all of our advocates off a cliff and say deploy Carbon Black, and you don't need to, you don't need all this DFIR stuff. But it's these are the guys who were spreading the word and were evangelizing for us, and were getting us into demos and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So you have some very difficult internal conversations about who's going to get you there, and what could we have. Another question that we used to get all the time was so we would run binary. We'd make a copy of a binary. We'd run it through VirusTotal, and then we get results back. And one of the arguments was, hey, what's the count of VirusTotal now? 4750 odd.
A lot.
Engines, right? So dozens of engines, and you can't run more than two. You might run McAfee on your endpoints and Semantic on your servers, but you can't run more than one AV in your enterprise in a practical sense, right? So we wrote this post about how and VirusTotal engines are not the same as the engines that you install on your endpoint, but look at the effects of running a binary through what is effectively 4 or 5 dozen antivirus engines, and the results that you get. So the response that came back was, so if I install this, can I get rid of my AV? I'm not going to tell you that. Here's the research we did over the course of a month. Here's the results. I'm not going to tell you that. I'm not going to be held responsible for telling you to uninstall AV, and then something horrible happens, and then it's like, you told.
Did Microsoft have AV built into the operating system, or free one at this point in time?
I don't know that MSC was a thing. It was just maybe about the same time or just before that. So I think it might have been
endpoint companies today, and I work with several of them. A lot of their messaging is, well, use us and just use Microsoft's built-in antivirus engine, and that's good enough. And they're confident enough now, at least the good ones, of making that recommendation to customers. So it's interesting to hear that progression, Michael.
Right. Well, and then now, just within the last quarter, I suppose, if you look at, and I don't have any dealings with Carbon Black, the company, day to day now, but the messaging that's coming out of there is basically, next generation antivirus, or getting rid of your old antivirus and using this sort of methodology. I believe Carbon Black is now, what do they call it? For PCI, it's a mitigating control or something that you can use, in lieu of, in a situation where you can't run antivirus. Right? Maybe your point of sale system won't run antivirus, but you can run, it's Linux, so you can run Carbon Black sensor on there. It gives you effectively the same protection that you do. And so now people are comfortable saying, you can take your old antivirus out and run this. But at the time, that would have been, could we have said that, and would that have accelerated things? Yeah, probably. Could we have run into trouble? Sure. At the time, the marketing department was me, and going up against the marketing department of Semantic and McAfee and those sorts of folks, it's like I'm going to get crushed. But we could. Here's data. Here's the experiment. Here's what we did. Here's some data to back this up. You make your own conclusions and go from there. There are a number of things that we probably could have done that would have moved things along, but we probably would have gotten in a fair amount of trouble, and we probably would have made way more enemies than we did friends. So,
what advice do you have for people that are want to do a startup today? And I guess let's first focus on what are some of the market opportunities that you see for startups today in security?
So first question first. Read everything you can. Read everything you can, digest it, and then stop reading. I think arguably the worst thing that you can do if you're starting out is to get too involved in entrepreneurial porn. It's very, which is not nearly as exciting as the other kinds of porn.
Wait till they get to the VR entrepreneurial porn.
Why is nothing getting done? Why are you all wearing your headsets? So read some books, read some blogs, get the principles down. If it helps, write it down. 10 Commandments style or whatever. Get the principles down, and then execute them. Don't spend a lot of time rereading or reading a new thing or whatever. People get so caught up in the hotness of startup life, and so from startup life in general. But a lot of these lessons or a lot of these things, some of them apply, a lot of them don't, because a security company and a general purpose software company or an app or a gaming company, they don't necessarily translate, right? So it's like, oh, we should be doing this and we should be doing that. It's like, how does that? That doesn't improve the product. It doesn't improve the service, our ability to deliver, our interaction with customers, and all that sort of stuff. It's like that. What they're doing in the Valley for Uber for dirty underwear is not going to apply to this endpoint thing that we're making, or this NetFlow thing that we're focusing on, or whatever the product is. You can't. You don't live in the Valley, right? You're not in a Y Combinator class. That's not, there's a reason why there aren't a whole lot of security companies in that thing, because it's not financial reasons and that sort of stuff. But don't get caught up in the porn. You're running a business. It's important to remember that you are running a business, and you have to act accordingly. So,
I like the advice of pick something and run and get your experience. And I was going to ask you something before, and you've got a lot of different experience now in different startups. How often do you find you have to then pause and kind of step back and say, all right, I got to get a little space, a little distance. Are we doing the right stuff from a business perspective? Are we doing the right stuff from a marketing perspective? Like, I think you can probably pivot too much. How do you calibrate when you need to step back and get a little perspective?
Yeah, I think at least every quarter, I tend to stop and look back and go, so here's what we came up with at the beginning. Developing indicators or tripwires, pickets, however you want to describe it. If we're succeeding, I should be able to check these boxes. If we're not succeeding, why is that? Why are these boxes not being checked? And then and adjusting accordingly. If it's becoming very clear after a quarter or two, maybe 2 quarters that things aren't going the way they're going, you have to revisit your assumptions, right? Why is it not happening? Is it the people? Is it what we're doing? Has the market shifted? All those sorts of things that, if you're selling something commoditized, it's not that big a deal, right? Anything sufficiently novel, you have to pay very, very close attention. I mean, I would say probably even more frequently than quarterly. I would probably look at it every month just to make sure that some big company is not. We're going to get into the X space, and then they turn their engines on that, and all of a sudden you get steamrolled. So,
yeah, certainly changing directions of the problem you're solving or anything of that nature is probably for me one of the most scariest things you can do as a startup, right?
Yeah. And then I guess to your second question, opportunities. I think from a technical perspective, there's probably I would look at things in like the deception space, things that you can do to make it more difficult for attackers once they get into your network, or where they actually end up attacking. This is kind of so I'm an intelligence guy from way back. So deception is it's second nature to me, but it's for other folks. It can be difficult. Most people think about the honeypot, and that's a good example. But there are all sorts of things that you can do in that space that I think that are important, that haven't been fully explored.
Interesting. We think of that space. John Strum, my business partner, and I, who did a lot of research in that space, we kind of think of it as a very crowded market today, and I think for that reason, have kind of shied away from it. So,
there's cybersecurity people love Marshall analogs. The problem is that most people are very, very poor students of military history. So I think if people spend some time and really dig into learn these military lessons and battles, people love to make fun of the Maginot Line. That's only because you don't know why the Maginot Line was built. It actually worked as designed. So if you could learn some of those lessons and the proper lessons and apply them in a digital context, I think that would, if I said I built a thing that would direct bad guys away from vulnerable parts and get them of your network, get them to a point where you can concentrate your resources and put up a viable fight, you'd buy that. Most people would buy that. That's what the line was designed to do, and that's what it did. German army better at fighting than the French army in general. So the good plan, but didn't work out. Had to come up with a plan B. So I think any sort of Marshall analog that people are trying to turn into a digital security solution, make sure you learn the proper lesson. The other thing I think, opportunity-wise, and I'll break this into it's two things or a subset of things. The SMB space is, I believe, sorely underserved, and I don't mean SMB like Bob's Burgers. I mean, like, less than $1 billion in revenue, which I wouldn't call that medium, right? I think we would all call that a pretty large business. But between coasts, there are hundreds of businesses that do, hundreds of millions of dollars a year in revenue, and they're fall in the SMB category, and their security is non-existent, and their IT is pretty rudimentary. So they're huge targets for exploitation. But what do people what do computer security companies focus on? And the salespeople focus on. They focus on the enterprise, right? The big company, Fortune, pick a number, because the work you have to do to land, 10 Fortune 500 gigs, the money is the same as, but you have to chase 1,000 SMB spaces. So solutions that can tackle that market at scale, I think, is huge. So and then the scale to me is the big issue. If you can, the story just came out, I think yesterday, about the huge international takedown of the cybercrime market. And at Kyrus, we were involved in a number of botnet takedowns, teamed up with Microsoft and several other companies. And you say, well, taking down a botnet is great, but that lasts for a week, and then other ones pop up, and that's absolutely true. But misses the point. If you could do a botnet takedown, every other day, suddenly the cost of the cost of running a botnet, the freedom to make money and not have to worry about the police or whatever, that suddenly goes through the roof, right? It's much more risky. It's not that botnets go away. It's just that you're dealing with a much smaller subset of very sophisticated actors, because the people who are just like, I'm going to set up a botnet, make a few $1,000s or whatever, and roll out. Those people go away. Being able to fight these problems at scale, working together with folks and dealing with the problem, globally, is, I think, any sort of solution that focuses on that sort of problem is going to be big, because we can't. There are only so many cyber cops, right, or special agents who can do cybercrime investigations, and the number of people who actually go to jail for cyber crimes is pretty dismal. If the volume of digital crime were to translate into crime in meat space, it would be Escape from New York.
Great movie,
right? It's this weird John Carpenter world that we're living in.
Mike, I want to ask you a question about how you're defining SMBs. One of the ways that I've looked at it, and I want your feedback on this, is I look at organizations large enough to have some kind of IT infrastructure and employ people in-house. And then I think kind of the next progression to that is they have at least one full-time employee dedicated to security. Is that a viable way to start kind of divvying up your market and maybe targeting some messaging?
I think that's reasonable. So a couple of anecdotes about, or an anecdote about a friend of mine who just came back from a tour in the Midwest. A number of SMBs, and like I said, where I got the example was, it's tens of millions to hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, and it's a family operation. The grandson is running it, the company that grandpa started 100 years ago, and IT is maybe one or two people, but if you need a new computer, take the credit card and go to Best Buy and pick up whatever, plug it in, and there's no gold image. There's no, if you can use email and the resource management application, and the browser works, that's they don't care, right? Oh, need a new printer. Okay, put the printer in. Turn off the wireless. I didn't know that was a thing. Mm-hmm. All the things that at a more sophisticated or mature organization would have. It just doesn't exist. And then security on top of that, they know that they need security because they've been victims of intellectual property theft or something like that, or CEO fraud. But the security guy shows up and he wants to sell them all this stuff. It's like, I don't need super high end. This is not Fort Knox, right? I need keep out the viruses, keep my people from making stupid mistakes, and make sure that my secret sauce doesn't end up in China. If you can give me insight into what don't I know, and then get me to a point, a known good state, and get me to a point where I know when the red light flashes, I can pick up the phone and go call somebody, and they can deal with that. That's every other aspect of their business, right? I know how to work. It's tool and die. It's manufacturing. It's whatever. It's like I know how this all works, and if something goes wrong, I pick up the phone. And guy comes and fixes it for me. I don't need to know the intricacies. I just need to know that there's a problem. And right now, most of these folks in this space, they don't even know what they don't know.
Michael, more questions for Michael?
No, that was it. The only one that I'm left with at the moment is, because Paul, you brought up the crowded space. Michael, you've got experiences going into crowded spaces. So if somebody's sitting at home and they've got an idea and maybe they think they could do it better, there's a lot now that writes about first mover advantage versus second mover advantage versus, hey, if you're in a crowded space, people already know about it. Does that factor into the way you look at something, or is it if you've got an idea and you think you can tell a better story, go for it?
Yeah, if you've got a better idea and you can tell a better story, absolutely go for it. I mean, there's more than one company that makes cars, right? And if you go back in the history of automobile manufacturing, why would I go after, why would Henry Ford? Why would I do this thing when General Motors is a thing, right? There's always going to be space, and if you're telling a better story, you're going to have an opportunity. I think starting out, and if you really believe in that, and you have something, even if it's just a prototype, get one person to use it. Right? Find somebody who will put their reputation on the line, even if it's just a pilot, even if it's just in a development environment. Have one person who will use it and give you feedback, right? Because they're going to help you test your assumptions a lot faster than if you have nobody and you make 5 office visits a day for weeks on end, and nobody, you're telling your story but nobody's actually using it. Your assumptions don't get tested, and you can't adjust. You have to be able to be nimble enough to be able to make those modifications, and you can't be so proud that you're not, if you listen to the market's telling you something and you go, well, no, I believe in this. Okay, well, you're going to be the guy with the most sophisticated solution that nobody's ever heard of. If you're going to lose, lose honestly in the marketplace. Don't lose because you sabotage yourself.
That's great advice. Not everybody is Steve Jobs.
Yeah, well, and the myth, maybe Steve Jobs wasn't even Steve Jobs, right?
It's funny. I almost said the exact. Yeah, we're on the same page. But I see a lot of people say that, and they'll hold out some iconic figure, real or mythological, and then say, well, I could be like, yeah, no, be humble and iterate, make it good.
Well, Michael. Awesome. Thank you very much for coming on Startup Security Weekly. It was wonderful chatting with you today. Lots of great advice and words of wisdom. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
We're going to take a short break, come back, and talk about the startup news for this week. So stay tuned.